Hello, everyone. This is Angie from All Creatures Podcast. Today, we're venturing into the nocturnal world of one of nature's most misunderstood and mesmerizing mammals, the bat. With nearly 15,000 species and evolutionary feats that outshine even the fastest land animals, bats have mastered the night skies in ways that still astonish scientists. Joining me today is Dr. Yossi Yovel, an ecologist, a neurobiologist, and author of the new book, The Genius Bat: The Secret Life of the Only Flying Mammal. Through his groundbreaking research, Dr. Yovel has helped reveal the sophisticated minds and complex societies behind those fluttering silhouettes that we glimpse at dusk. His work takes us from rainforests to deserts, and Dr. Yovel is here to share with us how bats think, navigate, and connect. I'm so happy to have him here on the podcast to discuss amazing bats and this amazing new book. So welcome, Dr. Yovel. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Angie, for the invitation and for the kind introduction.
I mean, I've been doing this podcast for about 8 years, and whenever Chris and I cover a bat species, we're like little kids with some of these mind-blowing facts and just how incredible they are. And so I know we're going to shine a lot of light on that today. We're going to touch on your new book. I have it right here, The Genius Bat. I only on the first chapter, we'll talk about that, the society role. And I'm already intrigued because you're a great storyteller talking about vampire bats and how they drink blood. So my semester's over now, so I'm ready to dive in this holiday break. And I'm definitely telling the listeners they should do the same because they're just so fun. So today, I want to talk about all the cool things about bats. But first, for our listeners, Dr. Yovel, I was hoping you could tell me just a little bit about yourself. What's your background? Do you have a favorite animal? And was it always bats?
Yeah, so I grew up as a kid actually in an urban environment, but it was a desert city that was just being built, southern Israel. So I was like on the outskirts of the city, and I would wander into the desert. So I mean, I'm not one of those kids who grew up in the tropics or anything, but I was always looking for the animals and playing around with them. Actually, the favorite animal uh, always has been a turtle, like a tortoise, a land turtle. Yeah, people are surprised. I like to say I don't mix pleasure with business. Business, bats are business, and
Smart. That's
yeah,
smart. Yeah, you don't want to loan money to friends. You don't want to mix your work with your favorites. I get it.
exactly. And I don't know. There's something magical. I used to wander in the forest. These are not really forests, right? In the desert, but where you have so few trees, we call it a forest, and looking for the turtles and finding them under rocks. And I actually, I don't think it really, today I work a lot with sound. We will probably get to
Yes,
this later
definitely.
on.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's related, probably not. I've never thought about it, but I learned to find turtles based on their sound, the sounds they make. Because I don't know if you know
Interesting.
this, but yeah, but male turtles when they court, they kind of bang into the female's shell.
Sure.
This is the way later I discovered that this is courtship, basically. And I learned to listen to this and to find them from really far away in the forest. So yeah, that was the first experience. I became super interested in animals. I wanted to be a vet. I read all of the James Herriot books and Charles
Loved
Darwin
him. Yes,
books,
yes, yes.
all of those. And then in university, in college, I realized that actually what I want to be is an animal behavior scientist.
Mhm.
I studied physics as well, and that's how I came to be interested in echolocation and BAT's sonar system, which we will probably discuss later. But in short, that's my history.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting how you tie in ecology and then the neurobiology, and now you're telling me physics. So, yes, we've got a lot to dive into, and I definitely like the multidisciplinary approach because bats, they have so many cool physiological things and facts about them. So, I know we'll dive into their um, evolution and their echolocation, and of course, how they're a very social creature, or at least some species. But really quick, what is one or two fun facts that will capture an audience and help them want to listen to this podcast and stick around?
Yeah, so I think we will talk about their sensory systems and immune system and sociality later. So I will not mention these now, even though they're really fascinating. But maybe two other points that are unknown and fascinating. So their longevity, people don't know this, but relative to their size, bats live more than any other mammal. So we know that small mammals usually live less than large mammals. A mouse, for example, would live up to 2 years or something like that. Now, a bat the size of a mouse can live up to 40 years sometimes. So there's a bat that was, yeah, that was tagged in Siberia 41 years ago and found again alive after 41 years. So somebody put a small tag on it. It's similar to how we bring birds. So really, their longevity is something very unique that scientists are now looking into. We are also looking into cognitive decline with age. This is something that my lab has recently started looking into. Do they show any cognitive decline? Maybe another interesting or fun fact is that many bats migrate, something that we also many of us don't know. We think of birds usually when we think of migration, but there are actually quite a few species of bats that will migrate thousands of kilometers. So maybe uh, a famous one, they're nectar feeding bats that spend this time of the year in central southern Mexico. And then in spring, they will mostly the females, I should say. Sorry, they will migrate up to Tucson, up to Arizona, northern Sonora Desert, Arizona, thousands of kilometers in order to give birth and lactate over there because they have a lot of food there. There's a lot of
Food.
cacti with flowers that provide nectar. So this is an annual 1,000-kilometer migration that happens every year, and we know very, very little. This is, you know what? One more fact. Sorry, I said two, but here's another one. They're very small, so many people don't know how small they are. So this bat that I'm now referring to is a 20-gram bat. I know you don't do grams in the U.S., but it's the size of a finger, basically, of one of my fingers. Yeah,
That's
and this
incredible. It's so
yeah, and
small.
exactly,
What
and this tiny creature can fly thousands of kilometers.
what species is that?
It's called the Leptonicteris. There are a few. That's the genus. There are a few species. But the smallest bat is actually a bat you can find in Thailand. It's called the bumblebee bat, and it's a 2 gram or even a little bit less than that bat. So it's the size of your fingernail or something like that.
Wow, and that's incredible. And I always tell people if do yourself a favor and Google a flying fox or a fruit bat and just look at their face, and
Hmm.
regardless of what your preconceived notions are or maybe any phobias you have, you could not look at a flying fox face or probably maybe this little bumblebee bat and not tell me that that is cute. And so but that's what leads me a little bit into my next question. And once again, just some quick hard hitting facts before we really dive into the meat and bones of your book and your research. But I talked about how bats make up 1,500 species, 20% of mammalian species worldwide, which is a lot. And like they come in big, like the flying fox, and super small, like you just mentioned with the bumblebee, and the other one that I can't pronounce that migrates. But a lot of listeners, unfortunately, and even people that are somewhat animal friendly, will sometimes think of bats as either just for Halloween or just for rabies or something scary that bites. What's one or two core things you'd like to reset about how people think of bats and why care about them?
Yeah. Okay, let's start with the first question. I mean, first of all, I always say I'm not a shrink. I don't understand why people are afraid of bats. I'm sure that anyone who comes to my with me into the field or with any bat researcher and sees a bat from a close distance will I'm not sure they will fall in love or say they're cute, but I'm sure they will lose fear when they see how tiny and adorable these animals are. Yeah, I think if we talk about disease, then actually, okay, bats do have probably a very unique, potent immune system. Maybe we talk about it more later. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that they transfer disease. And actually, there's not a lot of evidence that they will transfer disease. It means that they can cope with disease. It means that we can learn from them, actually. I don't think there's so much evidence out there yet that they transfer disease. Actually, one of our studies, we showed that sick bats will isolate themselves. They will not go out to forage. They will stay, somewhere in the cave. So in most cases, in general, this is true. I think if you don't interfere with nature, the chances that you get some infection is very, very small. Um, yeah, the rest, they don't get entangled in your hair. They don't bite unless you really hold them. Very, very rarely they carry rabies. It's true that they can carry rabies, but all mammals, as much as I know, can carry rabies, and there are some other vectors that are much more probable of transferring rabies than bats. Um, Although I know in North America they are considered to be a vector of rabies, but still, I think the number of cases where it was really validated that this is a bat is very, 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 very small. Every time I read about a case and then I read the details, I see, okay, but no, there's no real evidence that it was bitten, the person was bitten by a bat. So yeah, I mean, let's talk about all of their fascinating characteristics. I think, and, I okay. You also asked why are they good for us, or what's the service? We talk about ecosystem services. So I mean, of
Mm-hmm.
course, they're huge. So most bats eat insects, as you said, 1,500 species, and most of them eat insects. So they're tremendous. Their benefit as pesticides, for eradicating pests, insects mostly, is enormous. Without them, farmers would need to use chemicals, in a huge amount.
Mm-hmm.
And this is already happening. So I mean, in North America, there is a disease. It's called the white nose syndrome. It's a fungus that has killed millions of bats, and statistics show that due to this reduction in bat abundance, farmers are using much more chemical pesticides, and actually there is even some correlation, I would say, but a study suggesting that maybe this is causing more infant mortality, human infant mortality. I mean, but it's just a correlation, so we have to be careful here. But
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, um, their contribution to eradicating insects and pests, mostly pests, is enormous. And they also pollinate flowers and fruit that we eat. They spread, they disperse seeds. There are a lot of things they do. They're just an important part of the ecosystem.
Absolutely. And I remember one of the podcasts we did, we were bringing in facts about bats and talking about how they are so important to the agave plant in Mexico, as far as pollinating. And so to my listeners, I was like, if you like your
Tequila.
margaritas
Yeah,
and your chips and
exactly.
salsa, you better think a bat and not be
Exactly.
fearful of it and not just think of it for like a Halloween creature that's scary, because they're doing so much good in the community. And yes, they're out at nighttime, but that is when a lot of insects are out. And especially in North America or here where I live in Florida, I mean, the mosquito
Hmm.
population is just horrific. And we have them year round. It's horrible. And I would so much rather have more bats in my neighborhood than mosquitoes, right? So
Any vegetable that you ate probably was saved, at least to some extent, by a bat.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So it's just they're just so critical for the environment, and like I said, I think if you look at a flying fox and just give it a good look, you will think it's cute. You will think it's
Yeah,
cute.
so flying foxes, that's why they're called foxes. They really look
Hmm.
like dogs, and you're completely right. If you look in my book, there's a photo of the Mauritian flying fox, and you would just adopt this bat if you could, for sure.
Yeah, it's that schnoz or like the
Yeah.
snout. I mean, they're just adorable. So, yes, I mean, I just think that everybody, of course, I'm biased, but I think that everybody should really care about a bat, think a bat, put a bat house in their backyard, and try to bring more bats towards where you live versus being fearful of them or trying to get them away from you. And so, no, I appreciate that. So, thank you for that insight. And now, Dr. Yovel, you're both the ecologist, like we mentioned in the intro, but also a neurobiologist. This is an interesting combination. Hats off to you. That covers a lot of ground there. So, how has your training in these different disciplines uh, helped your research and how you ask questions and how you design your studies, both in the field and in the lab? And then, if you could just give us a little update on what you are currently studying in your lab.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a rare combination, but it's becoming more common, because neuroscientists. Okay, first I should say I think these are actually two disciplines that are almost, they have so much in common. So, neuroscience, a big part of it is interested in behavior, basically, right? It's interested in the brain and behavior, but it's interested in behavior. And ecology also, of course, is interested in behavior, the interactions between behavior and the environment, right? So, I mean, at least these two parts, which are huge, overlap, and the way I train myself is basically I try to attend conferences in both disciplines, and I think I do. So recently we had a small workshop with neuroscience and scientists and ecologists and people who are thinking of initiating a field called neuroecology.
Ooh, cool.
It already, the term exists already. I even called
Sure.
my lab a lab for neuroecology, but there's no real there's no conference or anything like that.
Yeah.
And sitting there, I realized that, indeed, I don't want to brag, but indeed, I kind of talk the two languages, which is something that you need, because even though they're interested in the same things, they're like different languages. It's really like different human languages, I would say. So yeah, so that's
Yeah. No, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I wish that kind of that discipline was around back in the day when, when I was picking majors and going to grad school because I love behavior so much. But the physiologist in me wants to understand what the neuron pathway is and what the neurotransmitters are, or neuropeptides, and what drives this behavior, what motivates it. And I have such a lack of training in the neuroscience part that sometimes, yeah, anything with the brain, it always takes me a lot longer to understand or to get a grasp on. And so I always tease my husband and say that I'm going to go back to school for neuroscientist, and he says, "No, no, you're not. It's a lot. It's too much school." So, but I really,
I,
yeah, I think that'd be really cool because they are like behavior is. I mean, it has to do with the body and the brain, but obviously a lot to do with the neurobiology. So well,
yeah,
maybe
I
that's what.
think. I
Okay.
think that the holy grail of many neuroscientists today is to study the animal in its natural environment. So, if possible, outdoors. It's very difficult because you can't really record neurons in an animal that is behaving in the wild
No.
today, right? But still, they're thinking of ways to kind of bridge this gap.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go to school. You can just collaborate with a neuroscientist who's interested in behavior. And I think this is going to be, in the future, the near future. We're going to see much more of this. I see all around, in the past. When I say past, I mean like 10 years ago.
We're
Neuroscience,
so
yeah,
old, right? Yeah.
yeah,
That's when I
exactly.
got my degrees. Yeah.
Exactly. Neuroscientists, they would go for classical animal models, right? Like mice and rats, and I don't know, maybe zebra finch if you're very exotic, or zebra fish. And today you see more and more neuroscientists adopting, and it's because the tools also became more general, like the molecular tools, and you see more and more neuroscientists going into studying wild, let's just call them wild animals. And I think you're going to see a huge boom of this kind of approach, and very soon. And then and then neuroscientists don't know everything. They need to work with ethologists, with ecologists who have a lot of theory and a lot of knowledge about what's going out there. So it will have to be a collaboration, and this is happening, I think.
So exciting. Well, good. And I want to turn our attention a little to your book and some of the big hard hitting topics in the book, like echolocation and their immune system. But first of all, I have to say I love the title of the book. And I love how it's broken up into the chapters. So we have the sociality, echolocation, evolution, and then conservation chapters. So it's really designed well and really intriguing. Like I said, I'm only on this sociality chapter, but I'm already like in love with your writing style and your storytelling. It it's fascinating. But the title, I have to know, was there a particular moment in the field or in the lab where you're just like, bats are genius? Because it's such an impactful word, right? Especially when you're talking about an animal, because us humans like to think that only, that we're the only genius out there. So do you have where did that
So
title
let
come
me
from?
first, yeah, let me first start with let me first start by saying that we are. we welcome all bats, even if they're not geniuses, into the
Oh,
book.
thank you. Good.
And somebody said, what, but not all bats are geniuses. And I said, actually, if you read, I think it's the second chapter where Jack Bradbury, one of the scientists that I interview, he says something like, this was the dumbest bat I've ever encountered, or something like that. And yeah, sometimes, the bats are dumb, meaning usually that
Yeah,
they don't understand what we're trying to teach them. That's
sure.
usually the context. Yeah, I'm often asked if bats are intelligent. It's a question you're probably also asked. Is the animal intelligent? And I always say, how how do you measure, right? I mean, we cannot echolocate. If you measure echolocation wise, they're geniuses, right? If you talk about
Definitely.
migration, sociality, if you compare them to mice socially, they're geniuses, right?
Yeah.
So I always say, and I don't like the question, or I think it's impossible to answer. So I try to explain why, but I really don't think that bats are geniuses. I would say, they're remarkable in so many ways. And yeah, and the title genius is just a catchy title, I think.
Yeah. But I love that approach because it's something I would say in the past couple years that Chris and I have really tried to capture on the podcast when we cover some of these animals is what is their super sense? Like if they were a superhero, what would be their secret power? And is it echolocation? Is it the ability to migrate? Is it the ability to hibernate? I can't hibernate. Is it the ability to basically do embryonic diapause where you're pregnant, but then the embryo freezes for
Bats can do all of this, by the way. Everything you said so far, they do.
well, bats do embryonic diapause? Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. Yeah,
yeah.
okay. So they are okay.
Some of them, some of them.
Some of them, hands
Yeah,
down genius. But
yeah.
yeah, but it's just these superpowers and these super senses that how do we even study them when we don't have that sense or maybe we don't know the right questions or the right experimental designs to quote unquote by our human uh categorization prove that they're genius or they have complex conceptual thoughts. I always think it's probably asking the wrong questions if we don't think that they're a genius or that they have at least some type of genius superpower.
Yeah, I
So,
think, first of all, I think Franz de Waal wrote this book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are, right? Which is, I think, a great statement. Yeah, I think I don't want to be rude, but it's an irrelevant question. I mean, the question that I'm asked is
mhm,
are bats intelligent? Because as we said, for in some dimensions they're super intelligent, in others maybe they're not. And then people ask me usually the next question is, but do they learn? For example, and obviously they learn, right? I mean, even nematodes learn, right?
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like you said. We need to ask the right questions, and I think, and that's if before we talked about the superpower of ethologists, of humans that study animals, I think is really that and that's my goal, kind of to try to understand as much as I can from all directions, communication, navigation, cognition, sociality, a physiology, although I'm not a physiologist, as much as I can. So then when I see the animal, I of course it's pretentious to think I really understand it, but I have some intuition. Why is it doing what it is doing, and what is going to be the next move? Yeah, that's my goal. To be about as much as possible.
Well, good. In line of that thinking, can you please be a bat for us and talk about echolocation? So, most people know that bats echolocate. So, what are some of the most surprising ways that bats actually use sound to navigate, to communicate, to hunt,
Mhm.
or even to interact socially? Can you walk us through some of the cool facts about that?
Sure. First of all, I should say echolocation is maybe the most mysterious. It's the most difficult one, probably. And it's not that's probably the reason why Thomas Nagel, the famous philosopher, wrote this paper in the 70s titled "What Is It Like to Be a Bat," where he actually tries to emphasize. He's talking about humans. He's not talking about bats, but he's bringing it back as an example for something that we all understand that we will never understand. By the way, I interviewed him, and he's also in the book. I should say the book is based on interviews. It's not the book is not does not include the interviews. It's not written as an interview, but it's inspired by the interviews. And Thomas Nagel told me that, and he's super famous among philosophers. Anyone who studies philosophy knows him. He's more famous than I say he's the most famous bat researcher, even though he's never studied bats.
I love it.
And yeah, and he told me that he as I don't know, 50 years ago, something like that, maybe a little more, he had a country house and there were bats in the attic or something. And sometimes one of them would occasionally go inside by mistake. And then he would watch it flying around the room, and he would feel that this is a completely alien animal relative to him. And that's where he got his inspiration. So, okay, but you asked me about echolocation. So, yeah, I've been studying echolocation. That's where I started. I did my PhD with about studying echolocation, and a lot of what we do is what I've done is to record echoes. So to actually to emit sound and to look at the echoes. So I think I'm not a bat. I'll never be a bat, but still I have very good intuition when I see an echo. When I hear sound, I have a very good intuition what's going on. I can we usually look at it visually, and I can see, okay, look, there's a small branch here, or this one is coming before this one, or the frequency went up, or stuff like that. But maybe a few interesting facts related to our research. So recently we showed that bats can navigate over many kilometers using echolocation only. Okay, so this was unknown because we know that in a small room, bats can, of course, use sound echolocation, and they will know, you see that basket behind me, they will know exactly where it is. But can they do this in large scale? This was unknown. Using very small devices, GPS-like devices, that's one of the things that we do in the lab. We develop these very tiny sensors that can be placed on the bats. As we said, bats are small animals, so you have to have very small sensors. We show that even if you cover their eyes, and we do it, we're very careful about that. We make sure that they can remove it once they land. We did a lot of controls before we did this experiment. But then we cover their eyes and we show that they can still navigate over many kilometers. And I'm not going into all of the scientific details, but we're really almost convinced that this is using sound only. Um, maybe another interesting experiment that just comes to mind when I think about echolocation is that this was just a serendipitous, how do you say, a finding. I'm not sure I know how to pronounce that word, but anyway, that was a serendipitous. Okay, but we had bats flying in a lab, and we had foam walls made out of foam, and we noticed that they collide with them, and again, they're kind of trying to go through the wall, and they don't give up. And we know that this is not common behavior because when we work with bats for years, this is not what they do. They learn that there is a
Yeah.
foam, and then they land on it, and then we realize that this is something that only naive bats that have never seen foam will do. And then we brought in many naive bats, and we had them fly, and we found that they will always, if you put a big wall of foam in front of them, they will simply fly into it as if they're trying to, they just don't see it's there. See, when I say see, I mean using sound. Now they can sense it. We know that they can sense it. It's loud enough to sense. And if we look at their echolocation, we can say that they are responding to it. So somewhere in the brain, they do see the foam, but they still collide. So this was for me super interesting. You can think of this, I think, as a kind of like a visual illusion for us. So there's an object, but we perceive it as a different thing, and that's probably what's going on there. They see something. Again, when I say see, I mean sound-wise. They hear something very big, but that reflects very little. And for them,
Yeah, like
this
a glass
doesn't
door.
exist.
Yeah, like a glass door or
Like a
something,
glass
maybe.
visually, exactly,
Yeah,
for us, exactly. And they just go into it again and again, and within a few days they will learn it, and they will not do this anymore.
yeah.
So that was a very interesting acoustic
I wish I
illusion
could
that we
say the
found.
same. I've walked into glass a few times, so
Yeah.
oh, they're smarter than me when it comes to that. Yeah, that is so interesting. And correct me if I'm wrong, they emit the sound waves. Is it from their nose and then they feel it then in their ears?
So some bats will use the nostrils, and then they will have two emissions, and they're very sophisticated. They create sophisticated beams. Most bats will use their mouth. Some bats
Okay.
will even generate tongue clicks, so they will use their mouth, but will click with their tongue. Their hearing, they're mammals. Everything is just like us. They use the inner ear. They use their auditory brain, but they have adaptations. Okay, so their inner ear is adapted to hearing very high frequencies. Their brain has a lot of very special neurons. We only understand some of them. Many of them are adapted to measuring time. So they're very good in measuring time, so they know I'm looking at the wall now, and the wall, I assume it's something like a meter for me, but they know exactly this wall is 8 milliseconds away. Okay, so they're counting time probably, but we don't really understand. That's what we think, of course.
Wow, it's so interesting. And then, but that must adjust if they're flying, because then would they have to factor in their flying speed to how far something
Right.
away?
So some bats actually suffer from what we call Doppler shifts. All bats have to deal with Doppler shifts.
Uh-huh.
So we know that when we move, sound frequency changes, right? If an ambulance is moving towards us, it sounds like the frequency is going up, right? And some bats actually use these Doppler shifts. So some bats, and this is one of the findings that I actually describe. There's a whole chapter dedicated to this. Where I interview the scientists who did this. I should say a lot of the book is about the scientists actually and how they made
Yes,
their
that's the
discoveries.
fun part, getting to know
I
the
also think so. I know some
getting to
people
know
want,
them. Mhm.
yeah, some people want to read about the animals. I think the humans are also interesting. It's my preference at least. And this was discovered by coincidence. So this professor Hans Ulrich Schnitzler in the late 60s, he just made a mistake. I'm not going into all of the details. And he found that the bats will actually compensate for Doppler. Okay, so they will reduce the frequency in order to compensate for this effect. And when he discovered this, there was uh, um, uh, a soldier, an officer from NATO that came to the lab and was studying, or not studying, was building or in charge of submarines or something. And he said, this is one of the most secretive things that we have in our sonar, in our submarine sonar. And apparently, bats are already doing this for at least 30 million years.
So amazing. Oh my gosh. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been using AI in your lab to help learn more about their communication. So have you learned anything about how bats talk, or is there like a dictionary, or like you said, I know that they can change things, but is the AI helping, or what have we learned?
Right. So this is something that's still ongoing. You asked me before, and I didn't answer what's. So this is one of the things, one of the directions that we're still strongly engaged in. Actually, already during my PhD, I used AI to see if I can classify echoes. So I looked at echoes of different plants, and I wanted to see if I can say what plant it is based on the echo, thinking that this could be very useful for a bat if it's navigating, for example, to know this is one plant or another. But yeah, in the past few years, we've been looking more into communication. A lot of bats are in parallel to echolocation. All bats also emit social calls, social vocalizations. They are more similar to language, to human language, even though we don't call it language, we call it communication because there are a few features that are different. And yeah, we're dying to understand what they're saying, of course, as we are with any other animal, right? With dolphins or with elephants and there's a lot of use of AI these days because these are, you get tons of data and you're trying to find patterns and you just can't do it if you're not using AI. One of the things we've done is we looked into bat chatter or aggressive communication. So fruit bats, most of the time when they're in the colony, they will be, if I'm using my human interpretation, they're kind of shouting at each other. You're coming too close and I'm shouting, move away, or you're trying to take a piece of fruit from my mouth and I'm shouting at you, and so on. And we show that if you listen to these vocalizations or if you just look at them, they all look very much similar. But if you throw them into an AI classifier, we see that we can tell apart context. So we can say what exactly was going on while they emitted these vocalizations. Now, I always say, this is the fact that a machine can do this is not enough. Okay, so we
Of
show that
course.
a
Yeah.
machine can separate them, but now we need to show that it's important for the bat, that this is actually relevant for the bat. And what we're doing these days, and this is really new, results are just being analyzed these days, is to look into and using fMRI to actually look at the response of the brain, of the bat's brain, while playing back these signals. So, when I say I identify that this is two bats fighting over food, does the bat's brain respond differently when I play this versus something else fighting over
Yeah.
space or mating or something like that.
Yeah. So cool. It's like I always tell my students, I'm like, it's an exciting time to be alive if you're a science or an animal
Yeah,
nerd. I really,
yeah,
really think it is. And so you did touch a little bit on some of their little bickering matches over food, and a lot of them do live in colonies. So I just wondered if you could just touch a little bit on how social bats are and how that helps them survive, or why do we care about them being social creatures?
Yeah. Yeah, as just to remind the listeners, we have 1,500 species of bats, so it's difficult to generalize. But yeah, a lot of bats are very social, from bats living in harems, bats that live in small family groups, probably. We're learning more and more about this. Bats that live in colonies with millions of individuals. And each of these teaches us something else. I always say if you want to study a mammal, sociality in mammals, and you're thinking of humans as, you're looking for a model for humans, which is what many people, that's how they think, and not necessarily. I study bats because I'm interested in bats, but some people always want to find a model. I always say bats are very good models because they're mammalian brains, highly social. They live very long, so they can create long lasting, and they do create long lasting social interactions. With vampire bats, which we mentioned earlier, we know that they create these bonds that can last for years, where they feed each other. If I come back hungry one day, you will feed me. If we have this bond, and maybe 2 years later, I will feed you. And of course they can recognize each other. Maybe I'll tell you about one story, one research that we've been involved in recently, and has to do with mother pup sociality. Uh, Bats navigate. One of the things we study is navigation. Bats can navigate very far. So food bats, for example, which we study, can fly easily 60 kilometers to some tree, and then well, that's like 40 miles or something like that, and back. And they will know exactly, how to reach that tree, even though they can't see it until they reach it in the middle of the night. And we were wondering how they do this, and we were wondering whether pups learn from their mothers, or whether there is any teaching or anything like that. And what we've done, and we have these tiny GPS devices, I mentioned them, that we place on the bed. So we place them on both mother and pup. And we found that the mothers will carry the pup to a tree every night during the first weeks of their lives. They will carry them to a tree and leave them on the tree, and then fly somewhere and forage. And then on the way back, they will pick them up and take them back to the cave. And we were wondering what's the purpose of this behavior, because these are not fruit trees, so they're not showing them what to eat, which we know many animals do that. Um, and what we found is that when the pup starts flying independently, that happens around 2.5 months, when it's 2.5 months old. It will first fly to this tree, okay, the same tree where it was left night after night. And we think that they're teaching them, this tree is not too far away, but you think about, you're a bat, you're flying out for the first time, you can easily fly 40 miles, and then you need to find your way back home. Think of yourself leaving your hotel room in a new city, walking for 3 hours, and then you need to find your way home without a map, right?
Yeah,
So
it wouldn't be pretty. I can already tell you.
exactly. Exactly. So we think that these trees, we call them anchors. They're giving them some anchor to the environment. They're showing them, this is a tree where you know how to go back home, and then you can start your exploration from here. And we should say that I should say that it's very important for the pup, as I said, to know its way back home, because if it doesn't, it might get lost. And if it's stuck during daytime, then crows will try to hunt it down, and there are a lot of predators. And the interesting thing is that they learn to navigate there while they're carried by their mother. So it's like a backseat driver learning to
Sure.
drive, not passively learning to drive, which is very interesting, I think.
Well, it is. It's interesting watching my 12-year-old, my 9-year-old, and now even my 4.5-year-old. We drive a lot of the same routes, like to school and to the horse farm and to a friend's house and to the baseball field. Oh, so many trips to the baseball field and back. And they'll notice, like my 4-year-old says, like, "Oh, we're getting close to our house." But of course, yeah, he could never navigate how to get there, but they're looking out the window and they're starting to pick up things. And then of course the 9-year-old could get all the way to school. And then the 12-year-old is like ready to drive himself there at this point in time. But it's really interesting watching the progression. And of course, I'm not a mother bat, so I haven't really been doing any teaching on directions or anything. They're just passively looking out the window. We talk about landmarks too, but I mean, these little baby bats are doing this, like you said, at a couple months old, which is just Fascinating.
Yeah, but you're right. You're right that with kids, I always give this analogy that we take kids to school every day and we show them the way. And you're right. I think, although I'm not a human psychologist and I don't have the research on this, but I think that kids actually learn more passively because they're more attentive than we adults. When somebody's driving us around, or even when I'm driving using some app, I'm not learning.
No.
I do everything just to avoid
Yeah.
learning, right? But you're right that kids are different. So actually, that's a good point.
Yes, and well, and just because of my age too, I used to have the old map, the road
Hmm.
atlas, and then I think there was finally the MapQuest directions. But I remember the old days when you actually had to stop at the gas station and ask for directions, or pay attention so you knew how to get to the friend's house or whatever. And but now I've totally unlearned. Now I can't go anywhere without my phone and my maps. And yeah, it's really fascinating. Uh, but one more physiological thing I'd really like to touch on with bats is their robust immune system. And you talked about it a little bit in the intro, but bats do host these viruses and they don't get sick in the other ways that many other mammals do. So, what are the leading ideas about how their immune systems work, and what might that help teach us about human health?
Yeah, I should say, I'm not an immunologist, and so I'm really not an expert. My knowledge of immunology is like a basic, undergrad immunology. I tell you what I pick up when and today it's a big thing, and there are whole conferences about that, and I sometimes attend out of interest. This is very very crude undergrad immunology, but what seems to be the case is that, yeah, first of all, as you said, they seem to be able to cope with viruses, and maybe also bacteria, by the way, without dying, and we see evidence, right? We see immune memory for this, and it seems one of the hypotheses that I find interesting is that their immune system is constantly partially active, not like ours, and that's how they don't go into these storms of activity, and that's also how they respond fast. But I think I think in the next decade we'll be learning so much so many new facts that it's premature to talk about it. Maybe another interesting hypothesis that has been around is, when bats take off, when they fly, their body temperature goes up by several degrees. We actually measured it. We put a temperature measurement a sensor, and we showed that every time they go up, the body temperature will go up like by 4 degrees Celsius,
That's a lot.
which is that's a lot. Yeah, we would be completely sick with such a temperature, right? And we could not operate, and I mean we would just go into bed. And they do it again and again, several times a night. And one of the hypotheses is that their immune system has to be prepared to cope with these changes, and maybe that's why it's so potent. But again, I
Yeah.
think these are just kind of preliminary ideas, and I'm also not an expert, so I'm really curious, as you are, to learn more. I do think that this is. I don't know if we can. It's a bit naive to say we will understand bat sequence and then we will solve human disease. But in generally speaking, this is the motivation, right? To try to understand if they have some kind of unique molecules or enzymes or something that maybe we can utilize in our treatment.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's an exciting time to be alive, regardless of your science discipline or what animals you love and your background, because it is. I do think that we'll see a lot of changes, for the better when it comes to just understanding more about the animals, just basic biology. I mean, it's always shocking to Chris and I when we cover this podcast and we're looking for facts about either their reproduction or about their senses, or how I mean, even how they migrate, and we'll come up with scientists don't know. And so for me as a curious person, I know for our listeners that are also very curious and ask a lot of questions, that's why I say it's a fun time to be alive. There's still it's still like the Wild West out there. There's still so much to learn about these, like, I mean, what's in the title of your book? It's like The Secret Life. And we're going to answer you answer some things, but I think there's even probably more questions that we have after reading it, which is that's always fun for me. So
Yeah, maybe just a comment on that. I always when I teach, I try to teach the students because that for me was also very hard. You know that what we read in textbooks, don't take it for granted. We try to to draw to portray whole stories because a textbook, a textbook cannot say we don't understand this, we don't understand that, we don't understand this, we don't understand anything. We can't say that. So we try to give you a picture, but many of these things might change when you will by the time you are a scientist. If we just look at my work before we started putting GPS devices on bats, we knew nothing about how they move during the night. Do they
right.
move 20 kilometers? Or, there was some old data with big bats, but we knew nothing about these small bats. And again and again, we're surprised by how far they move, how high they fly, how many insects they hunt, and more.
Well, yeah, I always joke with my students. So it's not really a joke. I say, "Oh, if you take this class again, and if we have a reunion in 5 years, whether it's a nutrition class or behavior class, I'm like, there will be things that I got wrong when I taught you. Like the notes are outdated. Like we now know this, this, and this. But that's
Exactly.
okay. That's exciting. It means we're moving forward, and especially, of course, with technology and all these young, brilliant minds. I think it's really a great time for science. However, I want to talk a little bit how it's not necessarily a great time to be an animal for several species. And so when we think about bats, I mean, you mentioned the white nose disease, but even just in general with conservation, bats face a lot of challenges globally from habitat loss, climate change, light pollution, and of course, disease, as I mentioned. So, do different types of bats, whether they're insectivores or frugivores, do they face different threats, or what are some of your biggest concerns in
Yeah,
the
I think
conservation?
I think you mentioned the big, they're all human related, of course. So, yeah, habitat loss, as you said, urbanization, wind turbines are killing a lot of bats. So that's a dilemma. Interesting. We call it, or ecologists call it the green dilemma, right? On the one hand, we're improving green energy. On the other hand, we're harming biodiversity. Yeah, different types of disease. But I think. I think that in general, you know, it's all about humans and human behavior. I don't think we can say something we can generalize and say fruit bats suffer from this. Fruit bats suffer a lot in the east from farmers who think that they are harming their crops, which is usually wrong, by the way. So they will put up nets, and many bats are killed by this. And there are a lot of heroes out there. I admit my work on behavior maybe helps conservation, but I don't work a lot directly on conservation. And I do interview a few of these heroes that diverted their whole career to do conservation. Most of them, they told me, so people like Fred Frick in the US, Merlin Tuttle in the US, and Christian Voigt in Germany. And most of them told me, we were bad scientists and we realized what's going on and we just couldn't continue our normal work. We had to do a change and start looking into this, if it's the white nose syndrome or the wind turbines. Or Merlin Tuttle, who established the first bat conservation organization, and he's actually the last chapter of the book is dedicated to him. He will say, he's optimistic first of all, which is good. Maybe I'll try
Good.
to take his approach, and
Yes.
it's at least it's nice to think so. And he says it's all about education. So he's done, I think, more than anyone, at least as an individual, he's done more than anyone. He's been all around the world, just educating, just telling these farmers, look, these bats are actually helping you. They're definitely not harming your crops. If they eat the fruit, they will eat it too late when the fruit is already too ripe and nobody wants it anymore. And usually it will not be bats that are eating the fruit anyway. And of course, he will tell them about pollination and rabies. He will, so many bats have been, so many caves, even I've seen this, have been burned down or blocked because people think that there's rabies, which is bullshit, right? Sorry
Yeah.
for my language.
No, I
Uh,
agree.
yeah, and and his mission is just to, and today there's also Bat Conservation International. It's a huge organization in the U.S. where I mentioned Fred Frick. She's the chief scientist, and they do a lot of work on educating And I think, that's the only chance that we and bats have. And I think it's kind of general for animals. I don't think maybe bats are a little bit more sensitive because of in some respects, but mostly I think this is a general phenomenon.
Yes, well, and that's why we're doing the podcast exactly because it is all about telling stories and sharing and hoping that somebody listening to this podcast is the next Jane Goodall for bats and wants to help save them and conserve them for all of their I mean, there's a million things to love about them, from their echolocation to their immune systems to their really cool parenting behaviors. So yes, I mean that's definitely the goal, and I just wonder I didn't know if you had any thoughts on what a realistic coexistence strategy looks like. So educating the farmers, but what about in an urban setting or
Mm.
uh,
So, mm. Some bats, by the way, do we see this with many animals do live in cities. Actually, this is something we study a lot, and this is super interesting for me. Because cities are a kind of an experiment. I always say things are changing fast. Who's moving into the city? We see changes. We see individuals that are bolder moving into the cities. We have a paper just came out this week showing that if you expose young pups to more diverse environments, they will become bolder. So maybe this is what's driving this boldness in the cities. Yeah, but sorry, this is not related to the strategy.
No, it's so interesting though. It's so no, it's
Maybe I
great.
can tell you something about my small world where I come from. So in my lab, I had a vet who did a PhD with me. Her name is Maya Weinberg, and she was super, super active. And thanks to her and a few others, they made fruit bats in Israel protected. They were the only
Oh,
species of bat that was not protected
okay.
because supposedly they harm fruit, even though that's a myth. And now they are protected. And today we have, for example, so because they like to roost in buildings, today there's a protocol written by her and a few other. There's a big sanctuary, a big organization that's also involved. Um, so there's every time you want to evacuate a building because you're going to demolish it or something, so they have to check if there are bats. It's not perfect, but still, this is I think better than they're aware. And by the way, this is maybe that's a good point. This is driven by activists, not by scientists. In one of these cases, there were bats coming out of a building, and somebody posted it on Facebook, and a lot of green activists became super, loud about it. And the entrepreneurs who were building this complex, they just didn't want this, so they contacted me to check and to do the scientific part and to see that which bats are these, can we move them out, how can we do the work without harming them. But this came from people who are interested. You know,
Yeah, and
people can do things.
that's the thing when I'm feeling either doom and gloom or something, that's I really try to remind myself and our listeners, and this story you just told really highlights this, how one person or a couple people through word of mouth can make a big difference. It
Hmm.
as much as we love the bigger conservation organizations, or there is numbers are great, right? When you have more people working towards a common goal, you can really push boundaries forward when it comes to policy and research and conservation, but still, one person can definitely make a difference. So I love those types of stories because they do help give us all hope. So no, thank you for sharing. And Dr. Yelvel, do you have any advice for people who are not scientists? Like you said, maybe they're activists, maybe they're animal lover, maybe they just want to learn more about bats. What is one or two concrete things that someone listening to this podcast can do in their own community that will genuinely help bats?
Yeah, I think, it's tempting to say put a bat box, but we don't even know if that's always a good idea because sometimes, you're interfering with the community structure of species. So sometimes it's definitely helping because there's a lack of roosting place, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to give like general advice, but I think we
Sure.
talked about these things. If you become interested and you know more and you pass this knowledge, you're already helping bats. I think if I get approached by people who want to shut some cave because they think it's bringing disease. So the more we know, the more we talk about it, the more if somebody hears about this and contacts me within minutes, I can stop this, right? By contacting the authorities, the National Park Authority in our case. So I think really knowing, talking, spreading. There are a lot of Facebook pages. I know this because when I was looking for places to to talk about my book, I found that there are a lot of Facebook pages everywhere, all around the world, doing bats. Some are more professional, some are just bat lovers. There are a lot of sanctuaries, a lot of organizations who are doing bat conservation, and and I think, yeah, take your kids out to see bats and teach them about bats, and not to fear bats. Maybe that's number one.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Is to get out in nature, and we do nighttime walks to listen for the
Hmm.
different frogs, and then look for the bats. And it's always been a positive message about all the good that they do. And yeah, I mean, as far as I know, my kids think they're just like any other cool nocturnal animal that we may see in our community. And we're lucky too, where I live in Florida. There's a bat roosting a big bat roosting thing at the University of Florida
Hmm.
where you
Hmm.
can see them all leave. And so once or twice a year, we'll always do that as like a family activity. And, you include a little ice cream and the kids are happy and the bats are happy. So,
That's
uh,
perfect. That's
yeah,
perfect.
exactly, exactly. Um, and so with the take home message from this book and of course this podcast, what is one thing that you want somebody, like I said, either listening to the podcast or hopefully ideally reading the book, and we'll talk about how to get your hands on it here in a second. What's one belief or feeling that you hope most people will walk away with after reading your
Mhm.
book?
I think we talked about the bats already, so maybe I'll say something about scientists. No,
Yeah.
I think we've covered awareness and knowledge and education and all of this, so I don't want to repeat myself. I think the book, for me, I did a lot of research, beyond the science, which I knew more or less, because it's my field. I've been working on it for 30 years now. But I talked to 25 or so researchers, and for me, this was always fascinating, because even if I thought I knew their work, I found out so much I didn't know, about why they thought this, who influenced them. Some of these people are 80 something years old. They were actually driven by Sputnik. So the Soviet Union drove some of the bat research, the best bat research in the US, for example, right? This is something you don't think of. So I don't know if I can crystallize this into one sentence, but I think, it's really interesting to see. I think the book is a good opportunity to see how science works. It's not all planned. It's a lot of it is coincidental. A lot of
Yeah.
it is by mistake. There's some
Yeah.
intrigues. There are a lot of nice stories, and yeah, I don't know. For me, this was the part I enjoyed when I did the research. Most, of course, the bats are fascinating, but that I knew already.
No, but that is so true. And I always tell my students they'll come in and they'll be looking, they want some either career advice or school advice. And one of my opening lines is like, very few people have a trajectory where they're
Hmm.
born and they know exactly what they're doing with their life and then they accomplish all those goals. For most people, it's the up and down, and the curve is not pretty, and that's okay. It's how you write the course, or what you learn from it, or the discoveries you make along the way, the people that you meet, the stories that you tell, and as you mentioned, I'm really excited to hear and learn from these scientists how they became
Exactly.
what they became and how their passion grew and how it helped them evolve into where they are today. So no, that's super great. And now, Dr. Yovel, speaking about people, for anyone listening to this podcast that is interested in bats or science or wanting to study behavior, do you have any advice for any budding young either bat researchers or enthusiasts out there?
You mean if you want to do a degree now? You
Yeah,
mean, or
yeah.
or how
We have a
how,
lot
how
of
young?
we have a lot of like animal or wildlife conservation uh interest and focus on this podcast. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
any advice?
Mm, I mean, you're welcome to contact me, and I can try to connect you with researchers in your like region. Yeah, there are many about researchers more and more in
Yeah.
all. If we think of North America, in any region, I can think of somebody doing something with bats. Whether it's conservation or behavior or physiology, or today immunology, which is big. And of course, there are also a lot. I'm not that familiar with the park authorities in the US, the federal authorities, but there are a lot of people working on bats there too. So I think there are many opportunities.
Oh, no, that's so great. Well, and then, of course, the most important piece of advice, how can people get their hands on your book? It's pretty easy, isn't it?
Yeah,
How?
it's easy. It's you just Google the Genius Bat. You can find it today. There's two different versions. There's the UK version, the US version. There's going to be a version in Polish coming out soon. So if you
Cool.
prefer to read it in Polish, then you can even do that. And yeah, I just hope you enjoy it.
Yes, please, please check out The Genius Bat, The Secret Life of the Only Flying Mammal. The Secret Life of the Only Flying Mammal, and this is by Dr. Yossi Yovel. It's a beautiful book. It's an exciting read, interesting read. If you have an animal lover friend, it's a great gift. It's definitely a conversation piece. I've been talking about bats to anybody who will listen to me for the last couple weeks. And so it's fun and it gets people talking and it's just a great read. And like you said, there's the animal, the bat element and all the cool research and behavior and physiology, but then there's also the human element, which and the storytelling, which I think really sets this book apart from other animal oriented books that I've read. So I really appreciate your work and your time and your passion
Thank you very much.
for the bats. Thank you. And all the heroes that you mentioned in the book, the researchers, the conservationists, the activists. We definitely thank you all for the work you do in helping save bat species and helping us learn more about these bats. Cause yeah, we still have a lot of secrets to uncover, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Every secret we uncover, we have 10 new ones. That's always how it works with science.
Exactly. Exactly. And now, Dr. Yuval, do you have any social media platforms that you would like to share with our audience where they can either see some of your work or your lab's work?
Yeah, I'm not very strong on social media. We do have a Twitter X user. I think it's the Yovel Bat Lab, if I'm not wrong. I do have a personal Facebook user, Yossi Yovel, and I do sometimes post. But if you want to see our work, we post everything on Twitter, and at the moment, that's where we mostly are.
Awesome. And definitely check out the book. You will thank yourself and your friends or family will thank you. And you can find it on any of the major purchasing platforms. Very, very easy. And I have the beautiful hardcover version here. I believe there's a soft cover as well, and
Hmm.
different languages coming out. And
Hmm.
that's how important this book is. So thank you for your time today, Dr. Yovel, and thank you for sharing your passion with us. Yeah, well, we'll have to have you back on the podcast again, and or recommend some of the interview people.
Hmm.
Might be also good to have on the podcast to interview them and hear more stories. So
For sure,
thank
for sure.
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye bye.